This article is out of AsiaTimes.com. ATimes.com. It was sent to me by a listener, and if he's listening, thank you for sending me this. This is a very interesting article from the Asia Times, ATimes.com. Post-U.S. world born in Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh. This came out yesterday, November 27th, 2012. It is symptomatic of the national condition of the United States that the worst humiliation ever suffered by it as a nation and by a U.S. president personally passed almost without comment last week. This has got to be pretty bad, right, folks? The worst humiliation ever suffered by it as a nation and by a U.S. president. Well, the president is embarrassing, so that whatever. He gets embarrassed all the time. But the country? The author is referring to the November 20th announcement at a summit meeting in Phnom Penh that 15 Asian nations, comprising half the world's population, would form a regional comprehensive economic partnership excluding the United States. President Barack Obama attended the summit to sell a U.S.-based Trans-Pacific partnership excluding China. He didn't. The American-led partnership became a party to which no one came. Instead, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, plus China, India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, will form a club and leave out the United States. As 3 billion Asians become prosperous, interest fades in the prospective contribution of 300 million Americans, especially when those Americans decline to take risks on new technologies. America's great economic strength, namely its capacity to innovate, exists mainly in memory 4 years after the 2008 crisis. A minor issue in the election campaign, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Initiative, was the object of enormous hype on the policy circuit. Salon.com enthused on October 23rd that, quote, this agreement is a core part of the Asia pivot that has occupied the activities of think tanks and policymakers in Washington, but remained hidden by the tinsel and confetti of the election. But more than any other policy, the trends that the TPP represents could restructure American foreign relations and potentially the economy itself. End quote. As it happened, this grand, game-changing vision mattered only to the sad, strange people who concoct policy in the bowels of the Obama administration. America's relative importance is fading. To put these matters in context, the exports of Asian countries have risen more than 20% from their peak right before 2008's economic crisis. Now, while Europe's exports have fallen by more than 20%, American exports have risen marginally by about 4% from the pre-2008 peak. China's exports to Asia, meanwhile, have jumped 50% since their pre-crisis peak, while exports to the United States have risen by about 15%. At 90 billion United States dollars, Chinese exports to Asia are 3 times the country's exports to the United States. After months and dire and entirely wrong predictions that China's economy faces a hard landing, it is evident that China will have no hard landing, nor indeed any landing at all. Domestic consumption as well as exports to Asia are both running nearly 20% ahead of last year's levels, compensating for weakness in certain export markets and the construction sector. Exports to the moribund American economy are stagnant. In 2002, China imported 5 times as much from Asia as it did from the United States. Now it imports 10 times as much from Asia as from the U.S. of A. Following the trade patterns, Asian currencies began trading more closely with China's renminbi than with the American dollar. Arvind Subramanian and Martin Kessler wrote in October 2012, they did a study for the Peterson Institute where they say that a country's rise to economic dominance tends to be accompanied by its currency becoming a reference point, with other currencies tracking it implicitly or explicitly. For a sample, compromising emerging market economies, we show that in the last 2 years, the renminbi, or the yuan, has increasingly become a reference currency, which we define as one which exhibits a high degree of co-movement with other currencies. We draw some lessons for the prospects for the RMB bloc. To move beyond Asia, based on a comparison, the RMB is the yuan, renminbi there, based on comparison of the yuan situation today and that of the Japanese yen in the early 1990s. If trade were the sole driver, a more global yuan or renminbi bloc could emerge by the mid-2030s, but complementary reforms of the financial and external sector could considerably expedite the process. All of this is well known and exhaustively discussed. The question is, what, if anything, the United States will do about it? Where does the United States have a competitive advantage? Apart from the commercial aircraft, power generating equipment, and agriculture, it has few areas of real industrial preeminence. Cheap natural gas helps low value added industries such as fertilizer, but the U.S. is lagging in the industrial space. 4 years ago, when Francesco Sisi proposed a Sino-American monetary agreement as an anchor for trade integration, the U.S. still dominated the nuclear power plant industry. With the sale of the Westinghouse nuclear power business to Toshiba and Toshiba's joint ventures with China to build power plants locally, the advantage has evaporated. The problem is that Americans have stopped investing in the sort of high-tech, high-value-added industries that produce the manufacturers that Asia requires. Manufacturers' capital goods orders are 38% below the 1999 peak after taking inflation into account, and venture capital allocations for high-tech manufacturing have dried up. So without innovation and investment, all the trade agreements that the Washington policy circuit can devise will not help. Neither, it should be added, will an adjustment in exchange rates. It is hard to fathom just what President Barack Obama had in mind when he arrived in Asia bearing a trans-Pacific partnership designed to keep China out. What does the United States have to offer Asians? We borrow $600 billion a year from the rest of the world to finance a $1.2 trillion government debt, most prominently from Japan. China has been a net seller of Treasury securities during the past year. It is a taker of capital rather than a provider of capital, being us. We are also a major import market, but rapidly diminishing in relative importance as intra-Asian trade expands far more rapidly than the trade with the U.S., and America's strength as an innovator and incubator of entrepreneurs has diminished drastically, even since 2008. No thanks to the Obama administration, which imposed a steep task on startup businesses in the form of its health care program. Washington might want to pivot towards Asia. At Phnom Penh, though, Asian leaders in effect invited Obama to pivot the full 360 degrees and go home. Oh, my. So if this doesn't help paint it even better, I mean, the world is laughing at us. And, hey, I understand this is from the Asia Times, but at the same time, they're laughing at us. They are watching us fall apart. Americans are fighting over, T-shirts and cell phones and TVs. And the rest of the world is saying, like, hey, we're getting ready for America to be like, no, we don't want to deal with your dollar. We have 3 billion people or something like that? 3 billion people. We have 3 billion Asians, and they're going to be a lot more important to their countries over there than the wimpy 300 million that we have over here. Something to take into perspective, folks. You know, my father always told me in my lifetime I'm going to see China become the most dominant nation in the world. And he was right on that.